My final project focused on the relationship between Puritanism and capitalism. So the argument that I presented in the paper was that the core theological principles of Puritanism created the necessary conditions for capitalism to take root in America. This concept is not new. Max Weber in the early 1900s noticed in his seminal work, The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, that the Puritans held certain values that allowed for modern industrial capitalism to establish itself. His work primarily identified the calling as the main driver behind this economic change. Weber defined the calling as the only means of pleasing God, exclusively by the fulfillment of interworldly duties which arises from the individual's station in life. The Weber Dictionary defines interworldly as a type of asceticism which seeks to change or transform the material or material conditions. This is key. Interworldly asceticism is different than Christianity prior to the Protestant Reformation and Calvinism. So why did Weber pick the calling as the main aspect of Puritanism that eventually led to capitalism? This really goes back to Calvinist theology, which emphasized unconditional election and limited atonement. Unconditional election is the idea that it is up to God and God alone to decide who is saved, rather than human behavior. Limited atonement follows closely in that Jesus only died for the sins of the elect. So there was no way to know definitively whether or not a person was saved. There were a few signifiers that provided some evidence for a Puritan status with God. As one can imagine, the state of not knowing whether or not you were saved produced an incredibly anxious psychology within the individual Puritan. One of the main ways that God's grace was demonstrated was through success in one's calling. The calling is a vocation that the individual's natural talent excels at. The way to be successful at your calling was through hard work and endless toil. The success was quantified through the wealth obtained. And by associating these so closely with God, Puritanism effectively turns hard work and wealth obtained from that hard work into a sacrament. This then leads to the perfect worker base needed for industrial capitalism being born. Over time, Puritanism eventually faded out, but the core teachings remained and were passed on through different branches of Protestantism. Because America was so sympathetic to Protestantism, Puritan values essentially had a huge impact on American identity by allowing capitalism to establish itself in the United States.